Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we're continuing our division previews. Today we are talking the Atlantic Division for the 2024-2025 NHL season. Guys, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports. Make sure that you subscribe down below, youtube.com/NHL on I-80 Sports, and join the conversation down below with what you think of this past offseason for all Atlantic Division teams. And who do you think are the teams to beat and who has gotten worse in the offseason? Let us know. Hit the like button if you also like our content as well, and hit the bell notification on that subscribe button so that way you know when our content goes live. We've only got one more division to preview, and that's coming next week with the Metropolitan Division, but you don't want to miss it. Subscribe down below. And if you follow us on Twitter, thank you. But if you don't, just in case, at I80_SportsNHL, we'll get you there. And if you follow us already, thank you guys so much for all of your support. We greatly value it. I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how you doing today?
Doing well. And here we are to preview the Atlantic Division. It's kind of a division where it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. But and it still could very well be that this year. But there's a lot of questions facing those said teams who are the top teams in this division every year. There's a lot of questions facing each and every one of them this year, and we're going to just get into it right now.
Yeah, we're going to dive head first for sure into this. We're going to talk some additions and subtractions as we've been doing on previous videos, which if you want to see our previous division previews for the Central Division and the Pacific Division, it's on our channel. Go and check it out. Let us know what you think. And let's run down right now the key additions and subtractions for each team in the Atlantic Division, starting with the Boston Bruins. Key additions here: Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Joonas Korpisalo, Max Jones, Riley Tuft, Mark Kastelich, Vinny Lettieri, and Cole Koepke. And key subtractions here in Linus Ullmark, Jake DeBrusk, Kevin Shattenkirk, James Van Riemsdyk, Danton Heinen, Jacob Lauko, Derek Forbort, Oscar Steen, Jesper Boqvist, and Milan Lucic. To the Buffalo Sabres, key additions here: Ryan McLeod, Sam Lafferty, Jason Zucker, Nicholas Aube-Kubel, Dennis Gilbert, and James Reimers, with key subtractions in Matthew Savoy, Zemgus Girgensons, Eric Robinson, Victor Olofsson, Jeff Skinner, Tyson Jost, Riley Stillman, Jeremy Davies, and Eric Comrie. To the Detroit Red Wings, some key additions here in Vladimir Tarasenko, Cam Talbot, Eric Gustafsson, William Legason, Tyler Mott, and Jack Campbell, with key subtractions in David Perron, Daniel Sprong, Shane Gostisbehere, and James Reimer. To the Florida Panthers, your reigning defending Stanley Cup champions, much to Tom's chagrin. Key additions here: AJ Greer, Chris Driedger, Tomasz Nosek, Jesper Boqvist, Nate Schmidt, Mackenzie Entwistle, Jacob Megna, and Adam Boqvist. So the brothers now reunited in Florida, or in this case, united. They've never actually played on a team together before. NHL team, that is. Key subtractions for the Florida Panthers: Brandon Montour, Vladimir Tarasenko, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Anthony Stolarz, Nick Cousins, Kyle Okposo, Kevin Stenlund, Casey Fitzgerald, Steven Lorentz, and Josh Mahura. To the Montreal Canadiens, key additions: Patrick Laine. We'll get back to him. Alex Barbalo, Connor Hughes, and that's it. Sorry about that. Key subtractions for the Montreal Canadiens: Jordan Harris, Tanner Pearson, Jonathan Kovacevic, Chris Weidman, Mitchell Stevens, Colin White, Elias Anderson, and Jesse Ylönen. To the Ottawa Senators, key additions here: Linus Ullmark, David Perron, Nick Jensen, Mike Amadio, Nick Cousins, and Noah Gregor. Key subtractions: Jacob Chychrun, Matthew Joseph, Joonas Korpisalo, Dominic Kubalik, Eric Brandstrom, and Parker Kelly. To the Tampa Bay Lightning, key additions here: Jake Gensel, Ryan McDonough, JJ Moser, Cam Atkinson, Zemgus Girgensson, and Connor Geeky. And key subtractions in Steven Stamkos, Mikhail Sergachev, Anthony Duclair, Matt Dumba, Tanner Jeannot, Tyler Mott, Calvin DeHaan, Hayden Fleury, and Austin Watson. And finally, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Key additions here: Chris Tanev, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Anthony Stolarz, Yanni Hakampa, Max Pacioretty, Steven Lorentz, and John Gillies on a PTO. Key subtractions here in Tyler Bertuzzi, Ilya Samsonov, Joel Edmondson, Ilya Lyubushkin, TJ Brody, Mark Giordano, John Klingberg, Noah Gregor, and Martin Jones. So a lot of moving and shaking around the Atlantic Division, much like the Central Division and the Pacific Division, and much like the Metropolitan Division is going to be next week as well when we preview that. But Tom, let's start here with you on this topic. What were some of your favorite offseason moves relative to the teams that made them?
Well, this is really the more things change, the more they stay the same division. Boston, you brought in Lindholm, Korpisalo, and Zadorov, but you lose Jake DeBrusk and Linus Ullmark. I don't know if that necessarily helps. You have your better on center now with Lindholm, but Jake DeBrusk was a huge part of that team over the years. On top of which, their so-called number one, who they were going to commit to, Jeremy Swayman is now holding out, and Linus Ullmark is now up in Ottawa. So now you're stuck with Joonas Korpisalo as your starter with a basically unknown Brandon Bussi as the backup. This could go about a number of different ways. I'll get into it a little more. Tampa Bay. So you bring Ryan McDonough back, and you bring in Jake Guentzel, and on paper they look like great moves. But the players that they gave up in order to bring them in order to replace them, I don't know if that's such a good idea either. Now, Detroit. I liked the Tarasenko deal, bringing him in, essentially trying to add to the team's depth. Bringing in Tyler Mott was huge. I guess Steve Yzerman just, looked at Chris Drury's playbook from the 2023 trade deadline. He already has Patrick Kane. So why not bring in two more guys who the Rangers brought in the 23 deadline? It looked good enough. I'm just not sure if the Tarasenko is worth 2 years. I think they gave him a little too much on that contract. But it still helps the Red Wings out, and we'll see where they go this year with Tarasenko. I think that they'll take a step forward with Kane the whole year and with Tarasenko, with Tyler Mott on that fourth line. I did like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to harp on the Boston thing at the moment. I like what Boston did to try to retool their lineup for yet another playoff push. I mean, the additions of Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov especially are huge because this was a defense last year that was hurt for a large chunk of time with Mark Grzelcyk and Charlie McAvoy missing a significant chunk of time last season. Still squeaking in, but like Nikita Zadorov, I think is going to provide a lot of relief on defense. It costs a pretty penny to get him. And realistically, I think he's more of a bottom four pairing guy, but still really good insurance on a playoff team. And Elias Lindholm, they needed center depth in the worst way possible. And Elias Lindholm is an instant upgrade on that top line over Pavel Zacha. Not that Pavel Zacha wasn't capable, but Elias Lindholm is a more surefire top six center than Pavel Zacha is. Pavel Zacha, I think, peak is like top 9, can still play second line minutes, but you're comfortable if he's playing second or third line minutes at center. Elias Lindholm absolutely gives them a number one center. However, as much as I like these moves for Boston, it's not going to mean anything if they can't get the Swayman deal done. If they can't re-sign Jeremy Swayman, which general manager Cam Neely is getting more and more tired of it by the day, I mean, what happens next? Do they let Swayman sit? Is Cam Neely challenging another team to offer sheet him at this point to match it? Who knows? It's really going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. I think the playoffs this year for Boston is contingent on Swayman being a regular goaltender in their lineup. So that's going to be a storyline to monitor as we start the NHL season. Tampa Bay, on the other hand, either got better or worse, depending on who you ask, honestly. But sacrifices were made, and lo and behold, Tampa wound up getting the hottest free agent in Jake Guentzel. That's not nothing. Jake Guentzel is a very important piece for the Tampa Bay Lightning moving forward. However, it was at the expense of their longtime captain, Steven Stamkos, former first overall pick, Steven Stamkos of the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think Tampa Bay will be roasted forever for letting Steven Stamkos walk after a slap in the face type of offer that has been rumored in the offseason. But I think it's forgotten slightly if this deal for Jake Gensel pays off. If he ends up lighting the lamp, does well, and brings the Tampa Bay Lightning back to the Stanley Cup and possibly even win, all is forgotten at that point, I think. I think you can consider that sacrifices needed to be made, and that was the key sacrifice that needed to be made. I do like some of the other smaller moves that Tampa Bay made as well to reshape their lineup as well, adding some important veteran depth to their lineup. Ryan McDonough instantly slots into the top 4 defensive scheme. Now they also moved Mikhail Sergachev as well. So he factors into that top 4 and power play unit as well. Cam Atkinson and Zemgus Girgensson and Connor Geekie are also really nice moves for depth in the top 9 and bottom 6. But that's just it. I don't see them beyond, just bottom to top 9 kind of moves. So a lot stays the same for Tampa Bay. Going to be interested to see what happens there. The other move I also really liked as well for a team that desperately needed steady goaltending, the Ottawa Senators finally getting a legit starting goaltender in Linus Ullmark. It cost a bit to get him, but I think realistically this is the move that Ottawa needed to make to be considered a team on the bubble this year. I think they really needed a goaltender in their ranks to show that they're not a pushover anymore. And it's very much akin to a team that we're going to talk about in the Metropolitan Division that may have just pushed themselves beyond just the bubble conversation and maybe into the Stanley Cup conversation as well, according to some experts. But we'll get to them next week, which I'll be excited to talk about a little bit. But those are my thoughts on my favorite moves from the offseason. But who looks better or worse on paper based on these additions and subtractions? Tom, let's start with you. Who looks better on paper? Who looks worse? I think there's less worse on paper than there is better.
Yeah, but it's more of like an asterisk. So Tampa, you have an asterisk here. You brought in Ryan McDonough, an old stalwart on the blue line from those Stanley Cup championship winning years. And you brought in the hottest free agent out there, which was Jake Gensel, and he was the hottest commodity on the market last year in the trade deadline. So in reality, you're bringing a more dependable guy back, and you're bringing the hottest free agent, the hottest commodity in there. I just don't know if Ryan McDonough is a better option than Mikhail Sergachev was. I really don't. Sergachev was a rock for that team on the blue line, and he was maybe their second best guy back there behind Victor Hedman all those years. Say what you will about McDonough, they were a good pair as well. I think they played together a little bit here and there. But you drop one to get another, and now on to Jake Gensel. He's a good player. Don't get me wrong. He was good in Pittsburgh. Was a huge part of their second cup in a row. He was great in the playoffs for them. But not for nothing here. I get it, okay? I get it. Jake Gensel is 29 years old. Steven Stamkos is 34 years old. I get it. But man, look at the separation in points between the two. Stamkos has been a point per game or over the last few years in a row in the games he's played in. He's been a point per game or better now, basically, since 17-18. And even in 16-17, when he barely played any games, every season from 16-17 to the present has been a point per game or better in the games he's played in. Now you look at Gensel. 2 times in his career has he only been better than a point per game. This past season with Pittsburgh and Carolina, and then back in 21-22 with Pittsburgh, and 2021 in the shortened season, okay, he was 3 times point per game or better. Other than that, he's never been a point per game or better. The most goals he's ever scored in the season has been 40 goals. His highest point total has been 84 points. Now, you're up with Stamkos, and I get the guy is 5 years older. He was 81 points last year, 84 the year before. The year before that, 106 points. Always a solid 30 to 40 goal guy. I mean, his biggest point goal total was 60 goals back when he was younger, but you're basically going from an 80 to 100 point guy to somebody who's 5 years younger, who is more of like a 70 to 80 point guy. I don't know if that's such a good idea. On top of it all, Gensel's a natural right winger. Okay, Stamkos could play center or wing. Stamkos sometimes played wing on the second line, wing on the first line. Sometimes he centered the second line. Right now, the Bolts wanted Jam Kucherov, Point, and Gensel on their first line. Great, but you're screwing up your depth in the process too. So that's what it's what's a little bit of a head scratcher here with Tampa with me right now. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they necessarily look worse per se, but I don't know if you could consider Jake Gensel an improvement over Steven Stamkos. I just don't know if that's a thing. And on top of it, you jettison off a guy who captained you to 2 Stanley Cups in a row. Now Boston, that's an asterisk as well. You brought in Lindholm. It was a great move. I don't know if Lindholm is going to replace the skates of Patrice Bergeron or David Krejci. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's that. I really don't think he's that. And like I said, we don't know what Jeremy Swayman is doing just yet. We don't know. We have no idea. So, yeah, is Boston a solid playoff team? Yeah, but they got to have Swayman. If they don't, what's going to really happen? And I'll mention it before. Say if Jonas Korpisalo and Brandon Bussi do become a solid 1-2 punch in net for them, they're going to be in no rush to be re-signing Jeremy Swayman, and then that's another problem they're going to have on their hands. Now, Ottawa. Okay. You brought in Linus Ullmark. I don't know if that moves the dial anymore. Obviously, Brady Tkachuk's a year older. Obviously, Tim Stutzel's a year older. You hope that they'll improve. You still have Claude Giroux. I don't know if it's enough for them. I really don't. Now, in terms of a team that looks really worse, I mean, the obvious elephant in the room here is the Florida Panthers. But that's just the price you pay for playing in a no-tax state. I look at Florida now. Their top 6 is basically untouched. You still have Lundell running that third line there, but you get past that. Their fourth line is totally different. You look at their deep pairs. They're basically their third pair is totally different this year. Your goaltending, you still have Bobrovsky and Knight. You know, you still have that. But I just don't know if that's. I think Florida's a playoff team, but to win a second cup in a row, I don't know. And I think the cup hangover may be pronounced this year in Florida. I don't really know. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll kind of just like run down like who I think within the division I think is better or worse. Because I honestly think like there's more better than there is worse this year. And I'll agree with you, Tom. I do think Florida on paper is worse than they were last year. That being said, they're still a good team. Like they're
I'm not
still
saying they're not. I just don't think they scream dynasty to me like Tampa did.
That's true. And that's fair too. And I think that's a fair assessment. The hangover could be real for Florida. I mean, they're on paper, their depth on the wings specifically give me a little bit of pause for concern. That being said, they still have some younger players that I would keep an eye on to really, help boost the confidence moving forward and maybe even get a little bit more important ice time going forward. Eetu Luostarinen is a person I think of instantly. Anton Lundell was huge towards the end of their playoff run as well, like playing some crucial minutes for Florida in the Stanley Cup. But they're really going to be relying on some of their younger depth to really start taking the reins from some of the departed players from this past cup run, from guys like Kyle Okposo, from guys like Nick Cousins, who saw some ice time in crucial playoff games. But Florida, a little bit worse on paper, still a very good team no matter what. Toronto, I think it's kind of a wash because I think it's left to be seen of what this team is going to be like under Craig Berube, which was another key addition for the Toronto Maple Leafs this year. Ultimately, I think they're a better team this year, but I think this is make or break for the current core that they have. I think they need to prove it this year with Craig Berube that they can stay together, or else I think we could see a breakup of the band coming forward. And that might mean one of either Matthews, Marner, Nylander, or Tavares leaving town finally. And it ain't going to be Matthews. I can tell you that for sure. He just got named captain.
I mean, it's obvious there, but I can delve into that later on.
Yeah. Boston, better team on paper right now. However, without Jeremy Swayman, they're absolutely worse. Tampa Bay, again, kind of a push. I would say and venture to say maybe a little bit worse because I think their depth was better with Steven Stamkos and what they could do ultimately. Buffalo, I think better just because even though they didn't make a lot of sexy moves, it gave another year of development to their younger players. And that defense is going to be scary good this year if fully developed, with the likes of Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Bowen Byram heading up that change of the guard in Buffalo with their defense. I think Buffalo can turn some heads this year. Detroit's another team stealthily better on paper this year, and I don't think enough people are giving Detroit credit for that. Ottawa also, I think, a little bit better on paper as well. I think Ottawa's going to turn some heads. And again, another younger team that with another year of development for Tim Stützle and the like. So, and Shane Pinto actually getting a full season as well and focused on hockey activity this year. I think Ottawa could also turn some heads. And lastly, Montreal, who's a team that I think constantly gets overlooked. They're going to start playing some more meaningful hockey this year. Unfortunately, because of how packed the Atlantic Division is, I think they're still, unfortunately, a bottom dweller in this division overall. But I think Montreal has taken some significant strides forward over the last year and a half. And in this offseason, even though, once again, they didn't make a lot of crazy out loud moves like they signed Patrick Laine, but as we just saw a few nights ago, he might be out for a while, unfortunately, because poor Patrick Laine is made of glass. And nobody's fault on that play either, if you've gone back and watched, but that knee just caved in. But Montreal, I think, still is better this year on paper. I think Juraj Slafkovsky, I think, is going to take a significant stride forward this year for the Montreal Canadiens. From actually going to Canada and watching them like in a game against the Florida Panthers, who went on to win the Stanley Cup, they're a fun team to watch. And I think they're going to continue that this year. And hopefully they just play fun hockey in general. But yeah, it's one thing for me to say all of these teams, who's better and who's worse. Let's judge for yourselves here. We've got lineup breakdowns here brought to you by Face Off. And again, as I've said in the past, take these lineups with a grain of salt because these lineups are ever changing. We also might talk a little bit about how things might be a little bit different as we look through these lineups. So without further ado, let's start with the Boston Bruins here, which I'll try to maneuver things as we go. So that way things can easily be seen rather. We're also going to be going through the forward pairings as well as the defensive pairings. We are not going to be going over power play and penalty kill units. However, if you're curious about those, go to dailyfaceoff.com and check out your favorite team or run through all the teams to see what these lineups could look like. We'll also look at the goaltending tandems as well. But less of me describing, more of me telling you what these lineups could look like on opening night, which is in 8 days at this point. Wild. But the Boston Bruins, first line looking like Pavel Zacha, Elias Lindholm, and David Pastrnak. Second line, Brad Marchand, Charlie Coyle, and Morgan Geekie. Third line, Trent Frederick, Matthew Patois, and Justin Brazeau. Give me the hard names early. And fourth line, Max Jones, John Beecher, and Mark Kastelich. Looking at the defense on the top pairing, we've got Nikita Zadorov with Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm with Brandon Carlo on the second pairing, and on the third pairing, Mason Lohrei and Andrew Peeke. Going down to the goaltending, we've got Joonas Korpisalo as your starting goaltender for now, with Brandon Busey as your backup. And it's important to note, again, no Jeremy Swayman at the moment because of his contract negotiation, his RFA contract negotiation. If Swayman obviously is signed prior to the beginning of this NHL season, he would slot in as your 1A on the Boston Bruins. Going on down to Buffalo now, or in this case, if we're looking geographically, up to Buffalo. On the first line, JJ Peterka with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch. On the second line, Zach Benson with Dylan Cousins and Jack Quinn. On the third line, Jason Zucker, Ryan McLeod, and Jordan Greenway. And on the fourth line, Beck Malenstein, Sam Lafferty, and Nicholas Aube-Kubel. To the defense, we've got Rasmus Dahlin with Henry Jokiharju, Bowen Byram with Owen Power on the second pairing, and on the third pairing, Matthias Samuelsson with Connor Clifton. Looking at the goaltending for Buffalo, we've got Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen as your 1A, and Devon Levi looking to bounce back as your 1B. Be curious to kind of watch Devon Levi this year to see if he has a bounce back season from a rather rough rookie season for him. Going now down to Detroit. The Detroit Red Wings, the first line, Alex DeBrincat, Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond. To the second line, Vladimir Tarasenko with JT Compher and Patrick Kane. It looks like a Rangers line, if you ask me. Anyway, to the third line, Michael Rasmussen with Andrew Kopp and Christian Fischer. See if Andrew Kopp was on the second line. Then it would really look like a former Rangers line, but that's just me. And lastly, on the fourth line, Jonathan Berggren, Joe Veleno, and Tyler Mott. When did the Detroit Red Wings become the Detroit Rangers? It feels like they have a bunch.
I don't know. And you're going to see it more now when you scroll down into your D pairs.
This is true. Looking at the top pairing of the defense for the Detroit Red, I almost said Detroit Rangers. I almost said it. To the Detroit Red Wings, top pairing, Ben Sherratt with Moritz Seider. On the second pairing, Simon Edvinsson with Jeff Petrie. And on the third pairing, Oli Mata with Eric Gustafsson. And the goaltending tandem for this year, we've got Cam Talbot as your 1A. And
look at that.
Yeah, exactly. Cam Talbot as your 1A and Alex Lyon as your 1B.
And wearing Dominic Hasek's old number 39.
Oh, yeah, he's got some important shoes to fill then. Good luck. To the Florida Panthers, your reigning defending Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. I know. I have to say it just to annoy you. To the top line, Carter Verhaeghe with Alexander Barkov and Sam Reinhart. Second line, Evan Rodriguez, Sam Bennett, and Matthew Tkachuk. To the third line, Eetu Luostarinen, Anton Lundell, and Mackie Samoskevich. And the fourth line, AJ Greer, Patrick Giles, and Jesper Boqvist. I almost said Gillies, but that would have been wrong. Jesper Boqvist filling on the right wing side of the fourth line for the Florida Panthers. Looking at the defense for the Florida Panthers, Gustav Forsling with Aaron Ekblad is your top pairing. On the second pairing, Nico Mikkola and Dmitry Kulikov. And on the third pairing, Nate Schmidt with Adam Boqvist. Looking at the goaltending tandem, Sergei Bobrovsky is your 1A with Spencer Knight as your 1B. Spencer Knight is a guy for me in general to watch just because he's still a guy with so much potential. And hopefully now that he's over the hump of his personal issues, I hope that we can really see his potential this year. It would be really nice story to kind of see him come back to the form that we think that he can be. Important to note here that Tomáš Nosek is currently out injured, so he could factor into that fourth line, maybe even as your fourth line center moving forward. Going on down now to the Montreal Canadiens. On the top line, Cole Caulfield with Nick Suzuki and Uri Slafkovsky. On the second line, Alex Newhook with Kirby Dach and Patrick Laine. That could be subject to change because we do not know what Patrick Laine's official injury is yet. So we will update as we go along. On the third line, Joshua Roy with Christian Dvorak and Josh Anderson. And on the fourth line, Brendan Gallagher with Jake Evans and Joel Armia. On to the defense of the Montreal Canadiens. On the top pairing, Mike Matheson with Caden Gooley. On the second line, rookie Lane Hudson with David Savard. And on the third pairing, we've got Arbor Chekai with Justin Barron. It always amazes me that I mess up easy names and then get Arbor Chekai correct, even though that's the hardest name to pronounce in the entire NHL. Just goes to show, kiddos, make sure you practice. So on to the goaltending for the Montreal Canadiens. We've got Sam Montembeault as your 1A and as your 1B, Caden Primo. Should be mentioned right now that Raphael Harvey-Pinard is on IR. He should factor into that defense somewhere probably in the top 4 once he does return. Changing teams here, we are now looking at the Ottawa Senators. On the top line, Brady Tkachuk with Tim Stützle and Claude Giroux. On the second line, Josh Norris with Shane Pinto and Drake Batherson. On the third line, David Perron with Ridley Greig and Nick Cousins. And on the fourth line, Noah Gregor with Zach Ostapchuk and Michael Amadia. Again, kiddos, practice your names. Looking at the defense on the top pairing, Jake Sanderson with Artem Zub. On the second pairing, Thomas Chabot with Nick Jensen. And on the third pairing, Tyler Clevin with Jacob Bernard Docker. And looking at the goaltending tandem here for the Ottawa Senators, got Linus Olmark as your 1A, let's be real, probably starting goaltender, and as your backup, Anton Forsberg. Now changing teams yet again. We're looking on down to the Tampa Bay Lightning here. Almost done here. We got 2 more teams to go through. On the top line, we've got Jake Gensel with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov. On the second line, Brandon Hagel with Anthony Cirelli and Connor Sheary. On the third line for the Tampa Bay Lightning, Mitchell Chaffee with Nicholas Paul and Cam Atkinson. And on the fourth line, we've got Zemgus Girgensson with Luke Glendening and Jesse Ylonen. And onto the defense for the Tampa Bay Lightning, we've got the captain, Victor Hedman, with JJ Moser. On the second pairing, Ryan McDonough with Eric Cernak. And on the third pairing, Darren Radish with Nick Perbix. Looking at the goaltending, definitely starting goaltending here, Andrei Vasilevsky, and backing up him this year will be Jonas Johansson. Should be mentioned that Michael Eyssimont is currently out. Not sure if he is on the opening day roster or not. That's something I need to update myself on at some point. Lastly, we are looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs. Looking at the first line for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Matthew Knees with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. To the second line, Max Domi with Willie Nylander and Cale Yarncroc. Third line, Nicholas Robertson with John Tavares and Bobby McMahon. And on the fourth line, Pontius Holmberg with David Kampf and Ryan Reeves. Looking at the defense, we've got Morgan Riley with Chris Tanev on the top pairing. On the second pairing, Oliver Ekman-Larsson with Jake McCabe. And on the third pairing, Simone Benoit with Timothy Lilleran. And looking at the goaltending tandem here, as your 1A to serve this year to start off with is Joseph Woll. And as your 1B, Anthony Stolars. Should be mentioned that Connor Dewar is out injured at the moment. Not sure where he factors into this lineup, to be quite honest. So a lot to digest there, a lot to kind of think about with these lineups in general. But Tom, I'll start off with you here. Based on looking at these lineups through Daily Faceoff, which lineups look the strongest and which look the weakest in your mind?
I'm going to be honest with you, and this is going to be a bold take. I really like Detroit, believe it or not. I really like how Detroit looks. I like how it's spread out. Their first and second line, I like what they have there. I like their depth on the third and fourth lines. I like their D. You would need to hope Mo Seider turns it around this year. Eric Gustafson, solid third pair guy. Didn't work out with the Rangers, but he can definitely run your second power play unit as well. I really like Detroit all around. Now, for offensive depth, I like what Berube's doing in Toronto. You know, playing John Tavares in the third line might make people go crazy, but I kind of like that. I like that they're not jamming everybody in the top 2 lines and they're using Tavares for some third line depth. I like that with Toronto. I mentioned before, I don't like Tampa jamming their stars on one line. I'm not going to talk about it. Ottawa's kind of doing the same thing. The one team I like on the back end, I do like Boston on the back end. I like their personnel back on D. I like the Bruins for that. So, yeah, if I got to go all around, it's Detroit and Toronto. On the back end, I like Boston. So, yeah, it's really just those 3. And, I mean, Florida, their top 6 are the same top 6 from last year. So, really those 4 teams I could say I really like what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, overall for me, just looking at the lineups in general, I think the strongest lineups are still Toronto, Florida, Tampa, and Boston, and kind of stick on Toronto right here. I do like Craig Berube's idea of playing John Tavares on the third line. I mean, he would be the most expensive third line player in the entire NHL at the moment at $11 million a year. However, it still makes a lot of sense. I think moving Willie Nylander to center on the second line, I think opens up a lot of possibilities for that top 6, and moving John Tavares down really helps the depth get it going as well. Because one complaint about the Toronto Maple Leafs over the past few years was once you get past their top 6, there's really not much to them. But I don't think so anymore. I think Toronto has a lot of depth now. Florida, even though they're a weaker team this year, they're still not a team to overlook whatsoever. And I think they're a team that's absolutely going to be in the conversation in the top 4 at the end of this year. Tampa Bay, despite the sacrifices that they had to make, still a decent team on paper. Although suffering from maybe Toronto syndrome of like, once you get past those top two lines, what really is there? And then Boston shouldn't be overlooked either. However, if Jeremy Swayman is not, again, to reiterate, if he's not in that lineup, I don't know how well Boston's going to do. Don't sleep on the other four teams in this division as well, with Buffalo, with Detroit, with Ottawa, with Montreal. These all four teams can be spoilers. And I could see scenarios where Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, and Montreal even contend towards the end of this season as well. More likely with Buffalo and Detroit, honestly, as teams to really kind of like push the envelope to teams near the bottom four of the Atlantic Division, meaning of the top four teams, like really kind of pushing teams, as I mentioned before, with Toronto, Florida, Tampa Bay, and Boston. I could see Buffalo and Detroit really trying to make a case to make the playoffs this year. I think it's entirely possible. So that being said, let's try to project who's going to finish 1 through 8, Tom. So season ends tomorrow. Where do we see the Atlantic Division finishing this year? 1 through 8, go.
Well, here's a bold take too. All these teams are going to have question marks. So I'll go with what I think is going to happen, but there'll be a question for just about every team. Believe it or not, I'm going to go bold here. I'm going to go number 1, Toronto Maple Leafs. But it's all going to depend. How will they respond to Craig Berube as their new coach? How will he utilize his depth that he now has with Tavares playing on the third line? How will Tavares respond to being a third line center? Still going to play in the first power play unit, no doubt about it. So the real question is, Sheldon Keefe was kind of more of a hands-off coach and let them play. Berube is more of a hard ass. So we got to see how he'll respond to them. Second place, Florida Panthers. They did lose a lot, yes. They're still the Stanley Cup champions. But the real question is, this team has gone deep the last 2 years in a row. They went to the finals 2 years ago. They went all the way last year. How will this team respond with all that mileage on them? Will there be that cup hangover? Will the pressure not be there anymore this year? Because now they finally got the job done, and now no one's going to be breathing down their back to get it done even more. So Florida, number 2. Number 3, Tampa. Tampa just wanted to get better defensively. I don't know if Ryan McDonough is getting better defensively. And even though they're doing what they did when Stamkos was there by jamming their top 3 best defensive players on the same line, will Jay Getzel, will he match the point totals and the offensive output of Steven Stamkos? That's going to be a big question for them. I think they're still a playoff team. Hell yeah, I think they are. And the other question about it is, will Victor Hedman, how will he handle being the captain of that team? I think what made Hedman and all those guys like Point Kucherov so good is that you had Steven Stamkos there wearing the seat and deflected a lot of the responsibility. That's not there anymore. Hedman is now the captain. And like I said, I'm going to reiterate it. How will Jake Gensel, bringing him in, will those numbers match the offensive output of Steven Stamkos? I'm not so sure they will. 4th place, Boston Bruins. It's a big question mark with Jeremy Swayman right now. There's no doubt about it. The Bruins every year prove me wrong. Every year I think they're going to take a step back, and every year they're right there in the playoffs. They were right there last year. They were in first place for most of the way last year in the Atlantic. I don't know if they're going to be as good this year, and it's good to see what happens with Swayman. Will their goaltenders respond to Swayman to the point where they can trade him or let him get offer sheeted? Or will it get to a point where that hole that Swayman has left by not signing that contract really hamper these Boston Bruins? That's going to be a big question. So that's them in 4th place. Now in 5th place, here's my bold take. You were going to see a return to the playoffs for the first time since 2016 for the Detroit Red Wings this year. I look at that lineup up and down. I like what they have. I like their veterans. I like their young guys. I like their depth. I think the Red Wings are going to make the playoffs this year as an 8 seed, which is going to show our Metro Division preview next week. You're going to see how tough it might be for some certain teams to get in next week. But I'm being bold here. Detroit Red Wings making the playoffs this year with the lineup they had. Healthy Patrick Kane this year. Vladimir Tarasenko on your second line. Solid 3rd and 4th line. Solid D. Goaltending so-so. Detroit Red Wings, 5th place. 6th place, Buffalo Sabres. I say it before and I'll say it again. The more it changes, the more it stays the same. Buffalo right now is still depending a lot on their young players to really get it done. I think Buffalo could have used a veteran like a Vladimir Tarasenko to go there. I can't buy what Buffalo was selling this year. That's why I'm placing them 6th. Ottawa Senators. You brought in Allmark, yes, But again, they're doing themselves no favor by jamming their top 3 players on the same line for a team that I thought was really going to turn the corner last year, and they didn't. And now they may run into the same problem. So 7th place, Ottawa. 8th place, Montreal, man. Nothing more to see here. Montreal, 8th place for me.
Yeah, so it's funny because I almost kind of let it slip before, like how I feel like the division's going to be like run, essentially like where each team is going to finish accidentally when going through like who's stronger, who's weaker. But I'll run it down still. In first place, I've got the Florida Panthers. I still think it's their division to run off with. I could see a scenario where Toronto does finish first, which I have them second right now. I think Toronto can finish first if we have another unworldly season by Austin Matthews. We had a fantastic season by him last year, and if he continues that pace, I could absolutely see Toronto running away with the Atlantic Division this year as well. It's also going to depend on the defense and the goaltending to really kind of make up for that too, which I think Florida has the edge right now, defense and goaltending, over Toronto at the moment. But Florida, I've got finishing first. I've got Toronto finishing second. Now, Boston, I've got finishing third, but here is the disclaimer. Boston finishes third if they have Jeremy Swayman for the majority of the year. If they don't have Jeremy Swayman the majority of the year, and they have to rely on Joonas Korpisalo to do a lot of the heavy lifting this year, I could see Boston even possibly falling out of the playoff conversation, honestly. But as of right now, I've got Boston 3. And fourth, I've got the Tampa Bay Lightning. I still see a scenario where they make the playoffs. Absolutely. In fifth, I've got the Buffalo Sabres just because I think that defense is really what's going to frustrate teams overall. And I think this is the year that they start really, really showing that this year. Which sucks because I really do like Detroit. I think Buffalo and Detroit are going to be neck and neck by the end of the season. And it's going to come down to the very last day between both of these teams. And it's going to be an absolute grudge match, which is going to be awesome to see. Detroit, I've got finishing 6th. I could see a scenario where they could finish as high as 4th, honestly. So I agree with Tom in his take. I've just got them 6th on my ranking at the moment. In 7th, I've got the Ottawa Senators as well. The goaltending got better, but the rest of the division got better as well. And I think that's what's going to that's what's going to hinder Ottawa right now. The bottom 4 teams in the division right now are waiting for Florida, Toronto, Boston, and Tampa to finally blow it up. So that way we see basically a coastal flip of the Atlantic Division. So when that time comes, we thought it was coming last year. We thought it was coming the year before that. It's not coming this year, so Ottawa's finishing 7th. And lastly, somebody's got to finish 8th, and this year it's the Montreal Canadiens again. And that's not for lack of trying. I think that this is a fun team to watch. I think that they're growing, they're getting better, and I still think it's going to be a stronger season this year than it was last year for the Montreal Canadiens. Before we leave here today, we are going to ask our question of the day, which is, Tom, if, put on the spot, who's the team to beat this year in the Atlantic Division?
Well, now I mentioned all the question marks for the teams that I had 1 through 5. The teams out of the playoffs, I don't see it. So as much as I love Detroit and how they're built, they're a playoff team and nothing more than that at the very best. I like their lineup, but they are nothing more than a playoff team. They are not the Detroit Red Wings of my childhood who won the Stanley Cup every few years and were loaded in 0-2 like you were playing NHL on easy mode. So that gives the 4 other teams with the question marks. I'm not gonna reiterate the question marks, but you go through all of them: Toronto, Florida, Tampa, and Boston. Each has a major question mark, right? Well, process of elimination is right now Tampa and Boston. The question marks are huge, so throw them away. So then that leaves you with Florida and Toronto. The mileage on Florida is what concerns me. Like I said, champions last year, finalists the year before, in a full 82-game season, both years. So that leads me to the Toronto Maple Leafs because their question mark is the least concerning to me out of any of these teams. They have a new coach, a new experienced coach who has been there before and who right now is trying to make the team better by spreading things out through the depth. The D is decent. The goaltending is decent as well. So right now, I have to call it like I see it. Toronto Maple Leafs team to beat for me.
And that's a fair assessment, honestly. I mean, I could just go easy and say, oh, my top 4 teams that are teams to beat, Florida, Toronto, Boston, Tampa Bay. But to be more realistic, Boston's got question marks. Tampa's got question marks. They're both flawed. It's between Florida and Toronto for me. Those are both teams that I think are juggernauts at the top of the Atlantic Division. And you've got 6 teams below them that are going to try to knock them off their block this year. And I think those 6 teams, with their flaws, with their question marks, are still going to struggle to do so. Even though Florida's gotten a little bit worse, even though Toronto has a new coach running the helm right now, I still think Florida and Toronto are the teams to beat in the Atlantic Division right now. And if you ask me, I still think Florida's the team to beat. I just think that they're a deeper team overall with less question marks because a lot of this team is still together from the Stanley Cup final. Yes, they're missing key contributors, but their biggest pieces are still in place, just like Tampa Bay was when they repeat the Stanley Cup. I'm not saying that Florida can. However, if there was a team that could have the possibility of repeating this year, I think Florida has a pretty strong case to possibly do so this year. They're still absolutely a team to beat, not only in the Atlantic Division, but also in the Eastern Conference. But guys, what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Did you agree? Do you disagree with our takes? Who do you think is the strongest team in the Atlantic Division? Who do you think is the weakest? Join the conversation down below. And make sure you subscribe down below, youtube.com/NHL on i80 Sports. Hit the like button if you like our content as well, and hit the bell notification so that way you guys know when our content goes live. Next week, we'll be coming at you with our final preview, which is the Metropolitan preview. Before we get into regular season content, you don't want to miss any of it. Make sure that you are subscribed so that way you don't miss it, and hit the bell notification so that way you don't miss when we go live. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you follow us down below at i80_sportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you guys so much because we greatly value all of your support. But it's time to move away from the Atlantic Division. It's time to preview the Metropolitan Division next week. But until then, I'm Brian. He's been Tom. This has been our Atlantic Division preview for 2024-2025 here on i80 Sports.